I've never seen such a detailed course when it comes to resistance training. Ross Gilmour, welcome to the JNP podcast. You loved coaching and you love coaching even more, and you are actually a coach of coaches.
I will tell you right now that coaches are one of the hardest demographics to coach. Just because you like to train, it's a completely different skill set from coaching.
A lot of people who are good athletes think they can be good coaches, which, like you said, is definitely not the case.
The customer is almost happier to waste the time and the money than just invest a little bit more up front in the beginning, get a proper professional trainer who will get them to that result sooner. Yes, it will cost them more in that 6 months, but at least in that 6 months, you've actually got what you wanted from the experience.
Testosterone and enhanced supplementation is something that's taken very lightly. You did your tests, you did your lab tests before taking that decision. How important is that?
The thing is, I say that I did my testing. I'd also been studying all of that stuff for about 2.5 years before even making a decision on it. There's not enough knowledge behind safer use.
What I'm loving about what you're saying is you educate your clients along the way.
I want my clients to finish working with me in a position where they can leave because they have all the tools that they need to do it alone, but they choose to stay because they enjoy the relationship and the service they're getting.
What is an advice you would give for young coaches who are starting their career?
That's a great question.
Quick one. Before we jump into today's guest, if you're getting value from the podcast, hit that subscribe button. This show only grows with your support, and I truly appreciate every single one of you. Welcome to another exciting episode of the JNP podcast. Today, we have a special guest, Ross Gilmour, a resistance training specialist with a fascinating background in bodybuilding competition. Ross is not only a seasoned trainer who has helped countless individuals prepare for bodybuilding contests, but he also serves as a lecturer for the resistance training specialist course here in the UAE. With his exceptional eye for movement mechanics and his deep understanding of resistance training, Ross brings a unique perspective to the world of fitness. As someone who comes from a strength and conditioning background and sports performance specialist, I'm especially excited for today's conversation, as we'll be diving deep into different approaches and philosophies that shape our training methodologies. In today's episode, we'll be covering a range of topics, including Ross's background and journey into bodybuilding and resistance training, insights into resistance training principles for muscle growth and competition prep, the importance of movement mechanics, periodization for bodybuilders, and some small bits and pieces of advices for newcomers to bodybuilding and the future of resistance training. Ross Gilmour, welcome to the JNP podcast. During my intro, I said that I'm really excited for this episode because I thought both of us come from two different backgrounds. Turns out you actually have a strength and conditioning background. You have different bits and pieces. So I just want to know a bit more about that background and what led you into diving deep into resistance training. As most of us know, now you're a lecturer with the resistance training specialist course. So I'd like to know a bit more about your background.
Yeah, cool. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I'm an old man. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you. I'm 38 years old. So I've been in the industry for a while, almost 15 years at this point. I actually started out, interestingly, playing rugby was my main passion back in Scotland. I mean, in Scotland, you play one of a few sports. It's either rugby, football, or golf, pretty much, right? Some other weird stuff as well, but mostly those three. And so it was actually playing rugby that got me into the gym. And so from the gym and working, I was doing a degree at the time in accounting and finance. And I graduated around about 2009 now. For anyone that knows 2009 in financial terms, that was just a shit show for the world in terms of the economy. It was the whole Enron scandal. Markets completely crashed. There was a massive dip. At that time, unfortunately, was not the best time to get a job as a graduate coming out of university. So I decided, well, let's go and try some other things. I tried to, go do a job in insurance. I then ended up getting into recruitment consulting. People who do that soul-sucking job, I don't know how they do it. You have to be a very particular type of person to do that type of job. But it was actually while I was sitting in that job that I saw an advert come up, and it was become a personal trainer, and they sell you the dream, make all of this money. And then you're kind of like, well, you know what? I know that it's not going to be quite as unicorn and rainbows as that, but actually I like the idea of going into something that is serving other people versus just serving someone else's bottom line.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm not enjoying what I'm doing. What's the risk in just actually going out and trying to do something as a passion for a couple of years? And you know what? If it doesn't work out, I can always get back into this. I've got that degree behind me. took the jump, and elevator version of it later is that within about 6 weeks, I was in the gym, on the gym floor after doing a qualification, taking my first client. So I made the decision very quickly. I quit the job, did the PT qualification, and I think it was like a 2-month turnaround from quitting the job to being on the gym floor. I found out very quickly that just because you like to train, it's a completely different skill set from coaching. Coaching in terms of how you work with other people versus how you train in the gym. And I think often that's a lot of people get into the fitness industry for that reason, is like, well, I enjoy training. It's like, we might enjoy training, but coaching someone else is a whole different kettle of fish. Yeah. I learned that very quickly.
And this is something that actually we encounter a lot. A lot of people who are good athletes think they can be good coaches, which, like you said, is definitely not the case. Like, it's something that is completely different.
100%. And so at the time I don't know if I'd consider myself an athlete, but I was a pretty decent rugby player at the time, and I was very much training for that. I always had a bit of a keen interest in the hypertrophy side of things, which I suppose is what brought us to the current day as well, but I'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, I found very quickly that, well, the difference between being an athlete and a coach, but I actually fell in love with the coaching part more than the athlete part, and that was, I really took pride in being attentive, being professional, upskilling, doing education, all sorts of things. I mean, my first qualification I actually ever took was a Pilates qualification, would you believe? No one ever believes that.
Pilates, yeah.
No one ever believes it, but it was actually a really good initial qualification, because in terms of anatomy, understanding breathing, bracing, strategies for engaging those deeper core musculature, if you want to call it that. And so it was interesting. I did things like that. I taught aqua aerobics. Again, when you try to picture that.
I definitely can't see you doing that, yeah.
I did everything. So I pretty much had no shame and just put my foot into whatever I could just to try everything, get in front of as many people as I could. Back in the day, we didn't have Instagram, we didn't have social media. So the only way you got to know the members of the club was you had to throw yourself around. You had to get into classes. You had to go up and speak to people. Hopefully try not to pester too many people, because otherwise, oh, here he comes again. But at that time and where we were, that was just the expected thing. They knew that trainers were going to come and speak to them. I feel like that's something that's lost now. It's a whole different topic of conversation. But I feel a lot of trainers hide behind their social media profiles despite having an active audience in front of them.
And you see something there that is not actually what happens in real life. It's something completely different.
So I think this whole hiding behind social media, if you're a personal trainer, not an online coach, I think is a big mistake, and you see that. Luckily, I wasn't part of that generation. I had to learn the hard way, or learn the traditional way. So from there, to really skip forwards, I spent about 1.5 years in Glasgow sort of building a clientele, and I was in a place where it wasn't exactly a high, let's just say, people's income wasn't exactly massively disposable like it is here. And so trying to gain clients there was really hard. Again, it was a blessing in disguise, because you had to graft for every single client that you got on board. And it was actually in Scotland that I met my current wife, Mal. Now, of course, we weren't together at the time, and we only knew each other about 3-4 months, maybe a bit longer, before we actually moved to Dubai. So our relationship, well, together. But the funny thing was, the guy who hired us didn't know we were seeing each other at the time. So it just worked out really well. So we moved over, and it was very much a case of, this is either going to make or break us. Either within a couple of months, we're going to be like, nope, this is not for us, or as in we're not for each other, or the job's not for each other. It was just a massive risk, a massive change of everything. Mal had lived away from home most of our adult life. I'd never been away from Scotland in terms of living anywhere. So we just thought, let's just jump in and see what happens. Luckily, it all worked out. We became very close, and that was sort of the start of our fitness journey together in Dubai. And
how long have you been here?
So I came to Dubai in 2012.
Okay.
So I've been here a while now. Came here initially with fitness first. And back then, the sort of craze in the fitness industry, or the trend at that time, was functional training, if you want to call it that. And I'm not talking about proper strength conditioning like you would do with your athletes. I'm talking about Viper, TRX.
Doing crazy stuff, basically.
All the tools and all the different, it was very much about the Grey Institute stuff and all the fascial slings and, 3 triplanar movement and all that sort of stuff. That was the big craze at the time, and the gyms were set up for that. But interestingly, what I found was something we noticed a lot when we came in, is that a lot of people were doing very random, very off the cuff and functional training, whereas Mal and I were we had our training programs for every single client saved on our tablet, structure, periodized, resistance training, mostly resistance training. So even when I was still at that time doing CrossFit, when I first moved over, I got into CrossFit. Well, I say I got into CrossFit. We actually started probably for about 6 months doing more bodybuilding style training because it was the easiest, most accessible style of training to do.
Yeah.
You maybe had 45 minutes, an hour between sessions or whatever. You just jumped in, did a back session or shoulder session, whatever else, got your workout done, got a bit of a pump, and then on to your next set of clients. But then the Dubai Fitness Championships was in its first main year. They started running it before that, but this was the first year where Sheikh, I think it was Sheikh Hamdan, got right behind it, and there was prize money involved. And so I don't know if you remember, it was in the Dubai Mall ice rink.
Yeah, I came here 5 years ago.
So you would have missed this then.
Yeah.
So the Dubai Fitness Championship initially was this huge thing. The Sheikh threw a bunch of prize money behind it. For lack of a better term, it was a CrossFit challenge before CrossFit was really starting to get big. Now, CrossFit was here at the time. It'd only been around for a couple of years. There was a couple of the original boxes like CrossFit Life Spark. What's the one in Alco's? The Burn Room. That's what it was called. So they were the two sort of main places. And there was a couple of other boxes around, but it was very much in its infancy at that point. But then within a few years, CrossFit exploded. Yeah. I mean, you probably saw the tail end of the CrossFit.
I saw. I'm not a huge fan of CrossFit. No. We said that, but yeah.
But you probably saw what would be I would probably say the tail end of the craze really starting to come down. I was sort of right in the thick of it at that time. I'd just got into trying CrossFit. I enjoyed it. I thought, well, I want something, because I'm very competitive by nature. I was like, I want something where I can, whether it's against the clock, against other people, I need something for competition. That's just, I'm just wired that way. And that sort of fit the bill. It's like, well, I didn't really want to continue playing rugby out here because the risk, and this sounds hilarious when you think about choosing CrossFit as a pastime, but I didn't want to risk injury from playing games. People and you chose CrossFit?
Seriously, yeah.
Strange. But interesting, I never got that many injuries with CrossFit.
Okay.
And I'll maybe get into why that was. I think part of it was preparation, sort of the emphasis on moving well, and I've always been big on performing and moving well. But as we sort of spoke off air, the volume of CrossFit, especially once you start getting competitive, it's just unavoidable. It's wear and tear.
I quite think now, since we're talking about CrossFit, if the volume was manageable and was periodized in a better way, maybe I would accept such a sport. But the volume is crazy on moves that shouldn't have this high of a volume.
I mean, I suppose the argument I would have to that, and we sort of spoke about off air, there's CrossFit as what was initially meant to be, which is that general physical preparedness pastime. So, okay, we do a broad range of, as they called it, varied functional movements performed at high intensity was the whole tagline. To an extent, I get it. It's like, okay, you're challenging all the energy systems. You're doing lots of different movement patterns. There are, of course, massive gaps in it as well. But it did tick a lot of boxes, and I understand the appeal to it. It was in a community environment. And that was the big thing, community. Yeah. Why do people community. Why do people go and play sports? Why do people get into High Rocks now? You see all these High Rocks gyms have popped up now. I think that you've got like Athlete, KOA, you've got all these places that bring people together, and it's that environment. The Den is another one that does CrossFit / High Rock stuff. And people are very, very much, if they feel like when they go to the gym themselves, they get very bored, or they're not as motivated, or it just doesn't excite them. Yeah. And I think there's those, it's almost like there's more than two, but there's two main types of people. There's the people that very much, they're a bit like me, like they're kind of robotic. If they have a plan, they're like, yeah, I want to follow a plan. I want to see progression over a broad period of time. My longest training program was 18 months. Okay. And only made changes to things once they plateaued, but the actual structure was like, you imagine a year and a half to the letter, following everything. I'm fine with that. If I'm seeing progress, which I did, that's what I wanted. But for other people, I understand that there's an entertainment component. They feel like, well, if I'm doing the same thing over and over, I'm just going to get fed up, and I'm going to get bored, and I'm just not going to apply myself. So, of course, from a coaching standpoint, there's a bit of management to those type of people as well. So if you got a robot, or if you got someone who wants a bit of more varied stimulus over time.
Yeah, you need to understand your clients too. Like, some people understand that you need to do the same thing over and over again to progress in certain aspects, whereas others just do it for fun. They want that variety to just enjoy it.
Yeah, and I think Dan John, who's a very famous sort of strength coach in America, he often said, well, you've got to give them a bit of what they want, but also make sure that you give them what they need, even if it's sort of disguised up within the program. And so I'm a big believer in that. If you've got these people who are a bit like attention span, or they get bored easy, okay, give some of the stuff they want, but just make sure that the bread and butter is also there as well, the meat and potatoes, so to speak. But yeah, so in terms of that progression, CrossFit was something that I did from probably I would say 2012 up till around, I'm going to say 2017.
Okay.
Did it really focused and proper during that time. Luckily in 2016, I had the privilege with a team to go to the CrossFit Regionals. They were, at that time, it evolved so much over the years. It's called the Meridian Regionals. So our region was sort of mixed in with Europe. And so the best of Europe and the best of Asia/Africa came together in Madrid and all competed against each other. And it was a really cool experience. I mean, I think they told us it was less than 1% of the total CrossFit population would ever get to compete at regionals. So, you know, when you sort of think of it like that, it was
some sort of an achievement. Definitely.
Very cool, very cool. And I, to be honest, I never really thought about it too much until much, much later, that at that time it was, you know, not many people had the ability to do it, but definitely experience I'll never forget. Although we were sort of speaking off air about the back issue that I ended up getting. And interestingly, something flared up during one of the events there where my pelvis essentially got completely twisted and the guy had to manually reset it.
During comp?
Had to go in between events and the guy had to manipulate it. It's like my pelvis had got so rotated out of place. We were doing these partner deadlifts.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly the tallest guy. I'm like 5'9", 175 centimeters. But my partner was an absolute midget, little Australian girl. She won't mind me saying, little Australian lady, Joanne. Absolute beast though. But the height difference, you're holding the same bar.
Of course, you need to adjust.
You'll even know from like studying RTS and the whole segmental proportions thing. She was just like loving life. My back just got trashed. I was taking all of the load on one side and it just ruined me. And luckily after that, I was able to get on with the rest of the workouts and it was fine. But yeah, but that was a really interesting time. So I did CrossFit up to that point. But once I'd done that competition, I'm not going to say I lost interest entirely, but that once I'd made that achievement, there's one of two things that are going to happen. Either you're like, I really want to do that again, or you're going to be like, not resonate with this anymore. I want to move on to something else. Almost once that achievement was done, the hunger to continue doing it wasn't there. Okay. I sort of achieved what I wanted to achieve from it. So I switched from that into doing just Olympic lifting on its own for a good year and a half. I just wanted to try and just focus on that, do proper Olympic lifting, structured periodized programming, build my lifts up, and I was able to get my clean and jerk up to 145, I think.
Oof, that's impressive.
Snatch up to 104. The snatch was always my worst lift. I felt like I should have always been able to snatch more than I did, but there was always issues once I got up to those higher weights.
You know, actually, like I told you before off air, my perception of you was definitely not that, especially with what I'm seeing on your social media. Like you actually did powerlifting, you did CrossFit, so you actually have a legit background in everything that we do in strength and conditioning. That's
so powerlifting, Olympic lifting, CrossFit, but also with the strength conditioning for rugby back in the day. Like there was obviously all the off season, like doing a proper athletes off season and having your hypertrophy blocks and your cardiovascular focus blocks, and then as you got closer to the season, obviously the specificity came up, the general stuff came down. So yeah, I think if you've not had that experience, it's difficult to, because I think often people say, well, strength conditioning, and they almost say strength conditioning or CrossFit strength conditioning. It's not. Like if you know strength conditioning properly like you do, and like, you know, your clients will, it's much more cerebral and structured, and there's a real science to it. Proper science to it. If anything, there's even more to manage there than there is. Hypertrophy training is pretty straightforward.
Because when you're talking hypertrophy, let's say you have mainly the resistance training component. There you have your plyos, you have your runs, acceleration, decel. Like you have just a bit more components that you actually need to periodize. Whereas hypertrophy, it's mainly like you have your resistance training. I need to periodize properly, of course, depending on how you want to do it. So I guess mainly that's the difference.
Yeah, and I think the big advantage I suppose almost have within the hypertrophy realm now is because I have that other background.
Yeah, sure.
I can really appreciate, so when people come to me like, well, okay, I've done a physique transformation, I want to focus on getting stronger in squat, bench and deadlift. Let's say it's that's pretty much powerlifting, but let's just say I want to get stronger. Okay, well, I understand how to program that, but also how to factor that in alongside some of the hypertrophy stuff, what needs to give and what needs to be pulled back.
Yeah.
Or what needs to be pushed, what needs to be pulled back. Same if someone's like, well, I want to do some power stuff as well. Strength and power stuff is okay. Well, how do you fix that all together within a program? I think if you were to ask most coaches now, like, okay, I want to be an all-rounder and I want to work on power, strength and hypertrophy, put me together a program. I don't think many would kind of know how to manage that all together in terms of not only the physiological demands, but the recoverability demands. How does nutrition go alongside that? How do you periodize it across, say, 6 months to a year? I don't know that many trainers necessarily have that background. And I think if you are a physique coach, but you've never done any strength conditioning, I do think it holds you back a fair bit, because there's so many qualities, fitness qualities that you can gain that actually improve your hypertrophy training if you're willing to just take the time to explore it. But many are just like, nope, this is what I do, physique coaching, and that's it. So I'm all over the place here, but
I love it. Jesus, I'm loving topics. Yeah.
So 2017 was sort of the time I decided, right, I feel like a new challenge. I want to do something different. And so I actually came across a guy called Nathan Johnson. He was interestingly like 4 or 5 years younger than Mal and I were at the time. So it was just this like young, fresh-faced kid, but he was great. He was a physique coach. He was actually working, or just finished working at UP, Ultimate Performance at the time. And we were just in a position where like, you know what, I want to do a different challenge. Let's do a photo shoot together. So my wife and I wanted to do a photo shoot. And he was in the gym one day and he was training in the same gym. So we just sat down with him. He showed us his results and talked us through his methodology. And we liked the fact that he had, which really resonates with us because it's very similar to how we work now, but he had a full coaching roadmap. He's like, right, here's how I'd lay it out. Literally showed us like, here's how I'd plan out this week's for this week's for this. So it was very much like split into like, here's a building block, here's a maintenance block, here's the dieting block, this will be the shoot, and then this is how we're going to come out of the shoot. And this was already how we were starting to sort of coach our clients, but this was the first person that we'd met and also who taught us to had a proper system in place to clearly take people through like a full physique journey. And that was a great experience for us. Even though he was younger, even though he had less years in the industry, his catalogue of results and his I suppose you would say just his ability to get results the results spoke for themselves. Yeah. Now, some of the methods at the time we questioned a little bit, but I think that's also part of trying something new. We were kind of like, well, I'm not sure we agree with this. We felt that some things were maybe a bit too aggressive in terms of the dieting. We felt that some of the training felt a bit like, well, do we have to do it exactly like this? But one thing that my wife and I have always been very good at, and I think this is what I found that a lot of trainers struggle with when hiring a coach, because I work with a lot of coaches now, is being a coach and trusting another coach to just put your full trust in, just like, you know what, you tell me what to do and I'll just do it. Now, what I'll always tell my coaches is that I don't want you to just accept everything blindly. Like, of course, you have questions, ask. But I do think at some point you do have to sort of go, okay, once I've asked the initial questions, we've got those clarifications out of the way and I'm sort of happy and on board. You just have to put your trust in the process and do the work. I think a lot of coaches really struggle with that, but that's something that we just wholeheartedly, we just put all of our focus and effort into it, did everything we could, and then that was our first ever photo shoot that we did together.
That's good. And speaking about that, like, as long as what you're doing is not random, like if a coach asks you a question, a coach will ask a deeper question than normal clients. As long as there's a why behind why you're programming the way you're programming, or why you're progressing the way you're progressing, you're explaining it to them. It's going to be more.
Well, the thing is I will say to that is that there's one thing having a why, but the why also has to make sense.
Yes.
Because a lot of coaches will provide justifications for why they do stuff, but it's nonsense. Like it doesn't make sense why they're doing what they're doing. So, okay, ask the question, find out why, but then, okay, how can you back that up?
Yeah.
Is there precedence to it? Is there literature behind it? Is there anecdotal evidence to support that? Or do you have enough of a body of evidence with the people you've worked with to show that when you did this was the outcome that you got? So I think evidence-based practice often gets, chalked up to just being, well, you read a research paper and, well, the evidence says this and that's it. That's not what proper evidence-based practice is. Proper evidence-based practice is you understand the literature, you understand the mechanistic aspects of it as well. So whether that's from textbooks or just known physiological mechanisms, mechanical mechanisms, whatever else, but you also have actually a body of practice, or you've gained the information from someone else who has had the years of experience and been able to demonstrate those outcomes. So I think that part often gets missed. It's just people often say, well, I'm going to give you a justification. It's like, but give me the substance as to why it works. Yeah. And that was something that both my wife and I were always very big on, is like, well, we want to make sure that this is ticking all of those boxes. Nathan was always able to do that. We asked why, and he was always able to go, well, here's why. And if there was any literature to support it, he could do it. If there was, okay, let me explain this and sort of prove it out, he'd be able to do that. And I think all coaches should be able to do that. Your clients question why you're doing what you're doing, you should be able to give a very logical and reasonable explanation as to why. So once we did that first photo shoot, that sort of almost sparked this sort of excitement for, this is a side of the industry that I haven't really been, even though we'd coached a lot of clients on resistance training, body composition, this was the first time I would say that we had a proper lens of what it was like to be a proper body composition coach. And so that really forced us to examine, well, how much do we really know about coaching people for physique-based goals versus just getting the general population moving well, healthier, and dropping a little bit of body fat. Like, there's one thing getting people generally in shape, generally healthier, moving well, maybe improving their cardio, their fitness. But it's like with anything, when you want to specialize in something, you have to really go deep. So that's what we did. And so from about 2017, 2018, we really went in on body composition, which is, I suppose, what you would probably know me more for now is the physique coaching, coaching coaches, photo shoots, athletes, the physique coaches. That's why I changed my name to that as well, because I realized of all the things I'd done, this was the thing that I'd also sort of took to the quickest.
Okay.
I was the most passionate about learning this of anything that I'd ever learned up to that point. And I found myself just very excited by it, both in terms of as a professional, but also doing it myself. So that led to more photo shoots. And then eventually in 2021, I did my first physique show as a natural. So the WNBF had its first year launching here, because we never had, and this is always the very interesting thing about bodybuilding in the UAE, there was never any natural shows.
Okay.
None. WNBF in 2021 was the first time that this region had a natural show, which that should probably tell you something a lot about the bodybuilding culture up until that point here, is that if you're looking at many of the coaches that were looked up to and respected for bodybuilding, it was all enhanced up to that point. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because I am now in that camp now as well. And so after I did my natural show, at that time I was 34 years old. And I sort of thought, well, I did all my lab work, blood work afterwards, and had a look at everything. Spent time doing the proper thing, getting the calories up, putting back on a little bit of body fat, just being at a good, normal, healthy range, not super, super lean. Training well, managing recovery, sleeping, all the stuff. And my wife and I are always very good with our nutrition. That's something that never really slips. We enjoy our food as well, don't get me wrong, but like through the week, we food prep every weekend, we top up in the middle of the week. We've done that literally every week if we're not traveling, even when we are sometimes, but pretty much do that every week for the last 14 years. Like, it's just one of our habits that's religiously consistent. We enjoy our food as well, though. We always try new things, but yeah, Saturday food prep, non-negotiable, never gets replaced. Wednesday top up, never gets replaced. Just happens, one of those habits. So I think for us, when I sort of did all the testing and I looked at it, I was like, and this is something that any guys who are listening to the podcast, who as they approach their 40s, they start to know that low testosterone levels start to become a little bit more of a concern.
Talking about that, because, especially here in Dubai, testosterone and if you want enhanced supplementation is something that's taken very lightly. Like you just said, you did your tests, you did your lab tests before taking that decision. How important is that? Because you know how things are here.
God, I mean, that's a rabbit hole to dig down itself, but I'll try and keep it somewhat concise. So the thing is, I say that I did my testing. I'd also been studying all of that stuff for about 2.5 years before even making a decision on it. So my coach, Cal, who I'm still with now, 7 years, I've been working with Cal now, Callum Reichduke of Pro Coach. It was Muscle Mentors at the time when I started working with him. So he very quickly, in the space of like 4 or 5 years, became one of the top prep coaches, I'd say in the UK, but maybe even broader than that. Definitely in the UK, one of the top physique coaches. But one thing he was very much respected for, and still is incredibly knowledgeable guy, just incredible brain. And so I was always learning from him. It was almost like I was being coached, but I was also being mentored along the way. Yeah. So I was always able to dig in and ask lots of questions. And when I started prepping as a natural in 2019, so I spent about 2 years to go through a proper building period before prepping, which is another mistake I think a lot of people make, is that they sort of look at the idea of prepping and go, well, I'm just going to diet for 12 weeks, 16 weeks, and then step on stage. Yeah. That was never my plan. My plan was, well, I'm going to take 2, maybe longer, 2 years, 3 years, build as much muscle as I possibly can, then diet for the stage. A lot of people prep before they're even ready to prep. They don't invest the time to actually build out the muscle. Now, if you're a natural, you absolutely need to take the time to do that, because it's bodybuilding, not body losing, right? So you actually have to have something to... And
it takes time to build muscle. It's not something that
anyone who's done it properly and naturally takes a hell of a long time. Yeah, that's why we talk about muscle gain in terms of months and fat loss in terms of weeks. Sort of like the relative scale, like a 1:4, 1:5 ratio. So you want to build muscle, like 6 months is going to be your minimum, I would say. When I hear people saying, I'm going to do like a 3-month building phase, it's like, what's the point?
You just can't.
First 4 weeks, you're neurologically just learning the skills of how to perform the movements that are in your training program. Then you're telling me you've got 8 weeks to try and build muscle realistically. How much do you expect to build in 8 weeks? Not a lot. So any building phase I've done, it's always been years, not months.
Okay.
So that was the case for when I finished the natural show. I did all my testing. Test was through the floor. I was like, okay, well, and you hear all these, you get people who are very much fall into what's called the appeal to nature fallacy, which is everything that's natural is superior to anything that's synthetic.
Yeah.
Or if you do anything that's outside of natural, inherently it's bad for you. Which is just if you look at it from an evidence-based standpoint, it's just a very stupid way to view things. I was going to try and be more PC than that, but it's just a stupid fallacy to sort of fall into, because you'll get people that say you should never touch artificial sweeteners, you should never have any food that's processed. It's like, well, good luck with that, because the majority of the food that we eat is processed in some form or way or another. There's the whole chemicals thing. It's like, well, if you were to look at the chemicals that are in an apple, for example, and you were to read those, because you often hear this, don't eat anything that you can't pronounce. Yeah. Well, then you couldn't eat anything, because if you were to pronounce the chemicals that are in every single ingredient whole food we eat, you wouldn't be able to pronounce any of them. So the problem is people have this idea that something has chemicals equals bad. Right. Now, the thing is if they've already got that, then you can imagine what their thought process is when they look at a natural physique competitor versus someone who takes enhancements. So for me, and to your point, I never took the idea of looking at it lightly. It was a case of, well, what's the implications of this? What are all the things that I need to keep in mind, safeguard? What are all the health checks I need to do to make sure that I'm not just looking at how much gains I'm going to make over the next 2 to 5 years, but how does this affect my health 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line? So I did all the research on that. So when I got to the point where I gave it, maybe I think it was like 6 months of, I finished my natural show and I gave it time, and I was like, testosterone had only came back up to half of the full available natural range. And I was like, I'm not sure I want to compete in natural bodybuilding and just be constantly operating at suboptimal ranges of testosterone. So I thought, well, for me, I'd rather support it up at the very least to just TRT levels. Okay. Get it up to the top end of the natural range and at least build off that. And that's exactly what I did. So I actually started on just TRT only for, I think, the first 6 months of doing that. And the progress was incredible just off that. And then over time, I progressed up. And this won't mean anything to anyone who's not in this side of things, but if you were to look at sort of risk categories of total androgen load, so people may be familiar with TRT. They hear, what is TRT? TRT is just testosterone. It's bringing using testosterone, synthetic testosterone, whether it's NNF or another ester, to bring your testosterone levels up to its top end of its natural range. That's what actual testosterone therapy is. In females, it's a bit different because they have other hormones that they've got to consider, like progesterone and estrogen as well. Guys can modulate estrogen as well, but that's we're not talking about PEDs. It's not a PED podcast, right? So for me, it was a case of, right, well, I'll get up to natural range, and then at least I know I'm supporting myself to the top end of the natural range. But then realistically, to be competitive in bodybuilding and enhanced, you have to go beyond that. Okay. And so this is where doing proper regular checkups, doing your bloods often, having a structure to when do you check what and what's acceptable and what's not. You have to know this stuff. That's actually what I wanted to ask you. So how do you consider, what would you say is something you need to check regularly? How often do you do it? Yes, I mean, I think it depends what phase you're in. If you're in a, quote unquote, you hear bodybuilders talk about health phases. Yeah. That's essentially them just bringing their test and they're taking out all other androgens out the equation. Any other form of oral PEDs, whether that's for lipolytic purposes or, any other management of any other symptoms, but they're literally coming down to TRT, and then they're just making sure that the blood work is sitting at normal, the top end of normal ranges. That's what a health phase would be. And that should technically be the baseline of where you start from. Unfortunately, you'll see this with a lot of young guys. You even see it in sport as well. A lot of athletes want to have enough muscle mass because we know that strength is like the mother of all qualities, right? If you're strong, it carries across every other speed, power, etc. Sure. To a point, obviously, you have to be able to express that. But, exactly. But that's a separate conversation. But let's just assume that you build more muscle mass, you have greater potential to contract more forcefully, therefore exert more force, be stronger. Then a lot of athletes will then just see that as, oh, that's a good way for me to. And it's funny how we talk about performance enhancing drugs, but it's always looked at in the context of bodybuilding. If you actually look in terms of performance, it does give you a massive leg up. It's why it's very much a taboo topic and unspoken topic in professional sports. Yeah. If you don't think that in American football, basketball, even baseball, and there's been plenty of PED scandals in baseball and stuff as well, if you don't think that your top athletes are playing around in the shadows and not really saying much, they are. It's just very well managed. Doctors know how to time things in a way where if there's going to be testing done, they can get enough warning in advance, they can clear detection out of the bloodstream and all that sort of stuff. Because sometimes that 5%, 10% increase in certain supplementation will give you that edge on while performing. So team doctors know what they're doing. They know how to play the game. I suppose coming back to the physique side of things, you should be getting your blood work tested regularly. Now, if you're on cycle, and the way that cycles are done now, I'm going to say the way they're done now, the way that many smart people are doing the cycles now is rather than there used to be this concept of blast and cruise, where you absolutely blasted your cycle and then you pull back. And then you blasted and you pull back. And it was maybe like 6 to 8 week pushes, pull back, push, pull back. Now, what a lot more people are realizing is that actually doing something that's more steady and sustained keeps blood serum levels of everything, hormones, etc., and all the other things like your lipids and thyroid and so on, a bit more of a steady keel. So people now run cycles for 9 months, a year, or even longer. It just depends. Obviously, it depends on severity. The guys we're talking about, like your big boys, like those guys, like they're running.
I think full year most of the time.
And they're running a lot. So for those guys, it's really important to take periods of time where they actually just come out of competing completely for they might even take a season off just to try and clear everything out and get things back in a good place. So at the very least, you should be doing your blood work, especially if you're planning to make changes. So if you're planning to escalate your cycle, that should be happening anytime that consideration is coming in. So usually every 8 to 12 weeks is a good time frame. Of course, there's the finances that come into that as well. You have to figure out, well, not only do I have to pay for all of this, all the drugs, I have to also be able to pay for the blood work. I need to be able to, on a yearly basis, pay for an echocardiogram. You have to be able to do all the different tests to check not just on your hormonal health and your blood work, but also look at, well, what does your cardiovascular health look like? What about things like joint health? How's that looking? Do you get a proper osteopedic assessment done as well?
What are some of the side effects that you might get
from just like PED use in general? I mean, probably the main ones that most people will see is that if people exceed their tolerance, especially to testosterone in particular, I mean, most people notice that acne is a big thing. There's an interesting thing with the acne though, because between one individual and another, tolerance can be wildly different. Like for me, I know that I can take my testosterone up to a certain point, and then I need to bring in other compounds which are known as DHT derivatives. So you're looking at like masterone or primobolan, and they sort of help you to increase your androgen load, but they help you to sort of manage the estrogenic aspect that testosterone does when you increase it.
Yep.
But some guys can literally bring it up to 500, 800, even a gram, and no issues. So there's a massive inter-individual response to this.
Of course,
so there's no one,
like training.
With drugs in particular, it's so crazy the wide difference. But when it comes to risk category, just to give an idea of, I suppose, how far I took mine, up to about a gram of total androgen load. So let's just say I was taking 350 test and 650 primo. So that's like 900 grams total. That would be within sort of what they would call a risk-averse model. From about a gram to 2 grams, somewhere in that region, is about a moderate risk. And then once you start going north of 2 grams total load, that's when you start getting into high-risk stuff. And that's where you got to be very, very careful. But the problem is what you see a lot of young guys do, and I think they're seeing influencers like Sam Sulek and these other people and going, I want to make progress like that. And again, none of us have seen Sam's blood work, so we don't know exactly how healthy he looks on the inside or not, or how well he's looking after those numbers or not. But a lot of young guys see the sebums, they see the status that comes with it, and they're like, well, I want to get there as quickly as possible. And they're blasting north of 2 grams at 19 years old, and it's just, but why? Because the one thing that's true is that both dosage and duration of exposure have an impact on your health long term. I think as well with PEDs is that they're also neurotoxic. Yeah. So it has an effect on your brain health long term as well. But a lot of the young guys, they don't think long term enough, and so they just see
want everything really fast.
I'm going to take all the pros, and it's not uncommon to hear. And I've spoken to many people even in the gym when I've been in Benos, and I'm like, oh, when did you last have your bloods done? Oh, I haven't really for like a couple of years. This is someone who's been taking consistently different PEDs more than I'd been at that point. I hadn't had the blood work done in 2 years, and I cannot get my head around that. Cannot get my head around why you would roll the dice with something which does have an impact on your health that needs to be carefully managed, but you're just so careless that you wouldn't even do the minimum required checks to make sure that you're not doing anything dangerous. So that's the dark side of PED use out here, unfortunately, is that there's not enough knowledge behind safer use. And I say safer, not safe, because there are trade-offs regardless of how
I agree.
How well you approach it. But there's definitely safer practices. And I think, unfortunately, people are not it's not sexy to talk about, well, let's make sure we mitigate and manage lipid profiles, and let's manage your heart, and let's manage your joint health. Because, for example, one thing I found within the first year, and I did not account for at all, I tried to, but I massively underestimated it, was that your ability to contract tissue, become like the force that your muscles can contract at, increases very quickly. Sure. And I was thinking, like, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to take my time and build my weights up on everything I'm lifting, but you get strong quite quick. And so even with me being quite careful, I was starting to get lots of niggles and pains, because the connective tissue around the joints, connective tissue hypertrophy takes a good bit longer than skeletal muscle hypertrophy does. So my muscles were getting very strong. Ability to contract was increasing very quickly, but the connective tissue wasn't able to support that.
You think this is why we see commonly like severe injuries from basic lifts when people get strong really fast, or they take an excess dosage of supplementation, where you see from a heavy bench press, some of them just tear their tendon.
Pec tears and stuff.
That's one, or maybe let's say their quad tendon from a heavy squat. Like, do you think that plays a huge role in that?
Could be part of it. It depends how experienced they are. I think for the guys who have been doing it a long time, if they've had enough time for their connective tissue to build up, then that might not be the major thing. But one thing that's massively overlooked is there's very much this sort of old school mentality of the slanging bang, sort of like just intensity,
Yeah.
just lift hard, train hard, almost like nowadays. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have, I suppose, what they're calling now the broccoli head TikTok influencers, which, you know, are talking about, oh, you know, you've got to train with proper mechanics and technique and whatever else. And of course, you and I both know I'm a massive proponent of proper exercise mechanics, but it can be taken too far, like anything. You can get so far to the point where you want your technique to be so perfect that you're not training with any form of effort, intensity, or at least nothing significant enough to actually get progress. So the problem is, I think that there's issues with both ends. There's the big sort of old school, people with the old school mentality in bodybuilding that like, well, it's just about effort. Just train hard, do the volume, grow. And then you've got those that just want to get everything so perfect that they just don't train hard at all. And then wonder why, well, I've got all this knowledge about moment arms and, you know, origins and insertions and length tension, but I hardly look like I lift, despite being training for 2-3 years. So I think there's a balance in the middle somewhere. So for a lot of these guys, I think they overlook the mechanic side of things. I think often many think that they train better than they do. So many of these guys are getting injuries because they think that they lift well, but their technique is probably not as good as they think it is.
You think they're influenced by what they see, especially when it comes to old school. Like you see the likes of Ronnie Coleman just lifting heavy, and you know, like in lifting the weights with momentum, just going with crazy weights. And then you have, like you said, the different spectrum with time under tension. Make sure you're engaging the right muscles, working with the slow tempo. What do you think? You said it's the middle is usually the best, but what do you think the emphasis should be more on?
Ultimately, all our body cares about is that, if you look at it from a muscle growth perspective, is that there needs to be, the term progressive overload gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
But the reality is that load is only one half of the torque equation. You'll remember this from RTS.
Yeah.
Ultimately, what our brain cares about is I need to be able to create more torque tension across the target tissues. And if you can increase the amount of exposure to that over time, you get what I like to prefer. I think it was Dr. Jordan Shallow that actually coined this term first, and it's a very clever way to look at it, is progressive overstimulus.
Okay.
So progressive stimulus, which makes sense because it's the progressive stimulus that you want over time. The loading is just a component of that.
True.
So I think often people get very caught up in, I need to be lifting heavier in order to see progression. But your brain doesn't necessarily think like that. It just thinks, well, as long as I'm creating more progressive stimulus to adapt over time, then that's what it wants. So I think that middle ground comes into how can you, of course, still ensure that you're getting stronger, but in a sensible way over time to create the stimulus that's actually going to get you there. Whereas if you just chase the load, and this is what I think happens, a lot of these guys, and also let's be honest, if you look at some of the more famous pec tears that have happened in bodybuilding in recent times, there was the guy, it was an American bodybuilder, I can't remember his name, but he was training with Larry Wheels, I think.
Yeah, in Venus, I think. Yeah,
incline bench, pec right off. At the end of the day, that guy probably hadn't exposed himself to 1 rep max, and he'd been doing probably 6 rep stuff, 8 rep stuff. End of the day, the body responds to specificity. Say that 5 times fast. But if you've not been doing 1 to 3, 1 to 5 rep stuff, like if you've not been training towards that intensity, or if you've not acclimated up to that, how do you expect to go from doing your 6 to 8 rep stuff. And let's be honest, most of these guys are training like 100
Partial
miles an hour,
ranges,
massive,
yeah.
like either partial ranges or tons of momentum and just bouncing out of positions to, right, now I need to coordinate this incredibly heavy, intense lift for 1 rep. Like, what was he expecting to happen?
Yeah.
So, like, if you wanted to do a 1 rep mat bench press, fine, but you would have to treat that seriously and you'd have to build up to it. So these guys are often doing stuff for the gram just to show off. And then it's like, well, you haven't built the tolerance to that. And the only reason you've been getting away with what you have been so far is just because you haven't felt anything yet. Doesn't mean there isn't something building away inside of there. You probably already had something lingering
Usually
there beforehand.
usually that's the case in most injuries.
I think Dr. Mark on the course, I really like this analogy that Dr. Mark Slave in RTS Global uses, which is the idea of landmines. It's like you've got this landmine there that you have no idea, and it just takes the wrong step, metaphorically speaking. And so for these guys, it's like, well, they're hammering their way through reps at, honestly, compared to what they probably could manage, like sub-maximal to what they can do, but they're just chucking it around really quick. It does increase the joint forces quite a fair bit, but that's a conversation for another time. But when they actually expose themselves to something that requires so much more stability with that level of load, they don't have the tolerance for it. So I think there's the pressure of doing things that are impressive on social media versus being married to tradition.
Yeah.
Also alongside not training as effectively as you think you do mechanics wise. So I think those 3 things sort of feed into it.
That's really interesting. Now, after your competition days and off air, we spoke that you loved coaching and you love coaching even more, and you are actually a coach of coaches. And basically that's really impressive because I see your reels, I see your stories, your eye for details in most of the exercises is fascinating because you focus on those small things, which is actually, I think, what coaches can learn from you. So take me a bit through that, like what got you into coaching coaches, like take me a bit through that experience.
It's an interesting question, and it's do you know, I think often people think of coaching coaches as like, well, this is something you do because it's a bit of a flex.
Yeah.
I will tell you right now that coaches are one of the hardest demographics to coach, because people think that, well, if you coach them, they're all super disciplined, they're all super easy to work with. They're not. In fact, there's challenges that they present that Gen Pop clients don't. So that's the first thing I just wanted to clarify, because often I think people think that, you just do it because you want to get to a certain status. I sort of fell into it because I was just trying to do a good job with my professional clients, and most of the clients, even nowadays, most of the clients I work with are lawyers, investment bankers, entrepreneurs. They own their own business, and so you do a good job with them. You start getting them into photo shoot shape, doing photo shoots, and of course, the first thing that coaches often think of is, well, oh, I like that. How can I do that?
Yeah.
And so one of the best ways is to learn is by doing. And so that's where it all sort of started. Is I started just getting really, really like almost like that we refer to as like the jaw dropping. Like, wow, how did they go from that to that in whatever time? One thing I've been very big on though is I don't do the whole 8 to 12 week rapid transformation thing, because often when most people come to me in the beginning, they're nowhere near in a position to even start dieting for a photo shoot. So I've really prided myself on doing sort of the longer, like, let's get you health-wise in a solid place, because a healthy physiology is a responsive physiology. But often people are not in a good place health-wise, and then they want to start like, right, I want to get shredded. It's like, but we could now apply a calorie deficit to you, get you training, but your responsiveness to those stimuli coming in, you're not going to get back from that what you want right now. So we actually need to get you to a place where physiology is like humming and singing, so that when we do apply that stimulus of a deficit, we do apply that stimulus of training, your body's super responsive to that. But a lot of coaches bypass that and go straight to, well, I'm just going to put them straight on a 30%, 40% calorie deficit, starve you, put all these food rules in place, can't have this, can't have that, cut out sugar, cut out this, cut out bread, and tons and tons and tons of volume. There's a bit more of a cerebral way to do it. So I think this is when coaches started asking, well, how are you achieving these results? And not necessarily wanting to work straight away, but it's like, okay, well, I'll sort of talk you through just on a high level, like how I'm sort of approaching it. And once they sort of see the high level and that there's quite a long-term plan, there's structure, there's a scientific sort of method to it, then they're like, okay, well, maybe I'll go through a photo shoot process so I can learn how to do the same. And that's kind of where it started. And that was like, I started getting more and more coaches coming and wanting to coach. And I thought, well, hold on, there's sort of something to this here. And it got to a point where the number of coaches I was working with was starting to exceed the other people I was working with. Okay. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I should sort of lean into that. And I'll be honest, for a long time, I was really hesitant because I was like, did I really want to go down that route? Because I didn't want to alienate the types of clientele that ultimately got me to the point where I was attracting the coaches coming in. And recently I've actually went back to being a bit more in the middle again, like not wanting to just focus on coaches. Like, you know what, I really enjoy working with the I hate to say this because it makes them sound like coaches are freaks, but the normal, like non-fitness industry people, because they present just challenges that we don't have. There's a lot of crossover. There's actually more crossover than people realize, but just professional people, it's different. And I think in order to be able to coach coaches effectively, you still need to keep your hand in coaching quote unquote normal people. It's the same reason why instead of going fully online, which was my plan initially,
I wanted to ask you about that because I remember you wanted to stop giving live sessions and go pure online.
I don't know if I ever wanted to stop fully, but I definitely wanted to pull back a lot. I've sort of 360'd that a little bit. So what I was finding is that I was trying to cut down the in-person, but then, and so with my online coaching, it's quite thorough. I get clients to send me form check videos, and as you mentioned, that I'm quite detailed with the analysis of that. So they would send the videos from multiple angles, and I'd go through everything, and if need be, draw out lines and explain the mechanics of things, and then be like, right, here's what I need you to go do. Apply that, re-record it, and send it back. So you're talking about over the course of 2 or 3 check-ins, back and forward sending these videos. What I was starting to find is that more and more people were like, well, can I come in and just do a session?
Yeah.
And we would solve those issues in like 5 minutes, like per issue there was, versus going back and forward over a couple of weeks. And so I thought, well, there's just so much value if you're a good in-person coach, if you've got a good eye and you know how to solve problems quickly, you can offer so much more value than any online coach ever will. Doesn't matter how good an online coach you are. It's different if you're talking about the nutrition, the accountability, the mindset, like that can all be done online, fine. But
true.
When it comes to the training, there's nothing that will ever replace that in-person experience.
Of
and
course.
It's interesting, I don't know if you've seen this as well, but I'm starting to notice that there's almost like from the consumer, there's more of a push back towards more people wanting in-person coaching again, because they're almost getting a bit disillusioned with, well, I can pay for an online coach, but either they're not seeing their physique change as much as they maybe want, or they still feel like they're not getting as much from their training as they would like, or they're still getting niggles or injuries. So the long story short of that is I just decided, well, you know what? There's just so many people that still want that in-person service.
Yeah.
And if it's in demand, it's like economies of scale. If it's in demand, why am I working so hard? And frankly, like I was finding that the online coaching side of things it grows, but it's slow. And I was almost like sort of just leaving, not only financially, because then they were all trying to run a business here as well. I was financially leaving money on the table, but I was also, well, these are people that this is where they want their value. They will get the most value right now. Okay, the coaching is valuable. I get it. That's why we do it. But they will get the most value immediately right now from doing some in-person stuff. So that sort of forced me to go back to doing more in-person again.
Okay. And I think especially because you're so detailed, so it takes much more time doing it online because you need to go back and forth because you have that eye. Whereas one cue live that you can give can actually fix the whole thing.
Yeah, it's everything. It's from that being able to just be at many angles at one time and like go through a set, show me like a working set, let's see how it's looking, and being able to see how it is when they're not fatigued versus when fatigue kicks in and the movement starts to break down. Like you can see so much from a full working set versus, okay, I still get them to send me full working sets online, but it's just so different when you're able to have that 360 view. You can get in, you can tactile cue hands-on, you can give verbal cues or auditory cues that you might not be able to give because you're seeing it in 2D versus 3D. And I think that's the thing, is you can have as much 2D coaching as you want, but nothing will replace that live if, and the big if is if you're good at what you do.
Of course. And speaking about that, you went into the resistance training specialist course. Now you're a lecturer with Dr. Mark and Benny. Actually, I took the course. Before taking that course, I was taught that machines are not quite as efficient, especially having the strength and conditioning background. It has to be more movement, more free weight. Whereas literally after the course, it changed. I'm not going to say my whole perspective because I still need that part, but I started to add a bit more, if you want, machine-based exercises, but with certain type of stimulus or intent, what I need to work on. So how has that chapter been? And talk to me about the experience with the RTS course and lecturing.
Yeah, cool. So this is something I could do almost a whole podcast on. So I actually started studying I became aware of RTS, and many people had seen the likes of like Joe Bennett, the hypertrophy coach. He's obviously a massive name on social media. And if you were to go back even a little bit before that, you had the MI40 days with Ben Pakulski. Ben Pakulski, many people know from the bodybuilding space and sort of the whole MI40 stuff. And so there was a group of trainers there that were really getting into all of that. And then a couple of factions broke off. You had Kasim Hansen, who went and did M1 education, and he's obviously doing very well now, very well respected. Joe Bennett broke off, did his thing. But they both were initially taught through the RTS system, which a lot of people don't realize. Of course, Joe speaks very openly about it. Kasim sort of doesn't talk too much about it because he's got his own thing now.
Can you say basically what's the RTS course for those who don't know? Please?
Yeah, so RTS stands for Resistance Training Specialist. So think of it probably as the industry's original exercise mechanics course. So this originated back with Tom Purvis back in the 90s. Like, he's been talking about this stuff for a long time. So for me, I knew, I'd sort of been aware of it, and then saw Joe Bennett stuff come up, and I was like, oh, he's talking about this RTS stuff. And it's funny things when I looked into it, and this is something that they've definitely improved on over years, but their marketing wasn't particularly good because I
definitely agree.
It took a lot for me to find information about this. I was going to the website, I was like, this website seems a bit outdated, or it seems a bit, and I was just really struggling to get any information on it. And I would still sort of keep up with like Joe's posts and some other people's posts, but then the sort of enthusiasm died down a little bit once I did the initial research, and I couldn't really find any way to get majorly involved without traveling to Oklahoma to learn from Tom himself. But then I started noticing some stuff come up from a place called Integra in London. So there's a man called Michael Goulden, absolute genius of a human being. He actually runs all the UK seminars for RTS, and he's been doing it for over a decade now, I think. So I'd always came across their posts, and then COVID hit. People were looking for, well, I've got a bit more time. I'm not delivering in-person sessions. Some of us were doing the whole delivering sessions over the Zoom, and it was, for people who like in-person training, it was soul destroying. I don't know about you, but it was soul destroying.
Just sitting for 5-6 hours sometimes.
I did not like it. Did not like it at all. But needs must, had to be done.
Okay.
So that came up, and I saw an advert, and they were sort of doing this. Well, let's do an online. It was the first ever, because they always did their stuff practically in person. So it's interesting. Many people were sort of forced to, I suppose you would say, like, expand or pivot their business model.
True.
We were already going online at that point, like a year before COVID hit. So that forced us to do more online coaching at that point. And that was sort of for us the start of because we'd set up I just left a company that was a physique transformation specialized gym. I was the director of training there for like a year. My wife and I set up our own business, and then within 3 months of setting up our own business, boom, COVID hit, which was a nightmare. So during COVID was a time where I just really dug into it. So I signed up to Integra's online thing. So it was a group of coaches from like the UK, and then me from Dubai, and there was someone else from somewhere else as well. And it just really opened my eyes, because it was the first time I had a structured exposure to this stuff. A lot of the terms I'd already been aware of, but the level of detail that they were going into, and it was like, okay, interesting. And I just spent from that point onwards 2-3 years just like going over the exercise professional videos, applying, learn, apply, learn, apply, learn, apply. And I was just applying this stuff practically for years and years. And then I decided I was at a point where, well, there's nothing in Dubai like this. So I'm going to go and create my own course and mentorship for coaches, and then see what we can offer here. So I set up a thing called the Muscle Mechanics Mentorship. And I ran two. I ran the first one. The first one was well attended. The second one, maybe 4 people on it. And then that was almost, it felt like that was the pool of coaches that were interested in exercise mechanics done at that point. Now, part of it was maybe just that was just within my sphere of influence. Reps tried to help a little bit with it, but there just wasn't really much traction on it. It could also have just been post-COVID. Many people were struggling, whatever else. So I did that. That was around 2021, 2022, because I remember I ran the first muscle mechanics course, and I delivered the practical weekends 2-3 weeks before I was due to compete.
Okay.
Which was interesting, because I look back at those photos, and I was like, it's like when if you've seen people diet for shows, like your cheekbones are in here, and it's funny. But then about a year after that, I started getting messages from, it was a really random account, which I found out later was one of Mark's secret accounts they would use just to speak to people. And then eventually I got contacted by Dr. Mark himself, and he was like, yeah, well, we've been seeing you, posting a lot of the stuff that we that we teach, and obviously we like and we agree, and just would you be open to having a conversation? So just got on a Zoom call, and I think initially what it felt like was an interrogation, because they were kind of just wanting to know, well, what's your intention with this stuff? Like, what are you trying to do with RTS? By that point, I'd already been studying it for like 4 or 5 years, and I was just like, well, honestly, there's just nothing here. And so when they sort of told me, well, we're planning to bring courses back to the Middle East and really focus on that market again, we're considering expanding our team. Is this something that you'd potentially be interested in exploring? And was like, yeah, absolutely sure. So that was really the start of getting involved with RTS Global. And it was very much, it's been a long process. I had to spend a lot of time getting on Zooms with Mark and Benny. I had to attend 3 level 1s first.
Oof. And the level 1s are quite long.
Yeah, so 3-day weekends. So I had to attend 3 level 1s first. Then, and it was great to do it because, the first one was, I was just attending as an attendee, something that I'd been wanting to do for years. I'd already been studying level 1 and level 2 materials for like 4 or 5 years at that point. And then the same level 1 that we attended together was the first time that I got that practical experience doing it. I mean, that's a very uncommon thing for RTS. Usually you study it and then you're going and doing practicals within months of being exposed to the content. I'd been exposed to it and had to sort of almost self-learn over years and years of just trying to apply and then going back and taking pictures of exercises and drawing all the moment arms and trying to do all this stuff. Machines, taking pictures of machines and trying to analyze the equipment. But it's a whole different ballgame when you actually do it in person. So it was really cool to just experience that as a student. But the next 2, and I'd already came to the level 1 knowing that this was the pathway that was going on. We'd already agreed that, right, you attend this one, you do it as an attendee, you sit the exam like everyone else. The next 2, come, observe, participate, but take notes, observe the teaching, observe the order. The one thing that was really nice though is because I am going to be teaching as of now on my own, because I've had Dr. Mark attend the first one that I taught. Benny was at the last one, and then the next one I get a chance to just take ownership of it and run with it. But one thing that's been really cool to do alongside Benny and Mark, who I respect so much, I mean, they've both been fantastic and just both incredibly knowledgeable individuals. Benny's journey, like if you ever get a chance to get him in for a podcast, if he's in
hopefully
Dubai,
when he comes to Dubai,
his story with RTS is phenomenal. I mean, he's been exposed the least amount of time between me, Mark, and him, but his understanding and because he was very lucky that he got time to spend with Tom, staying at his home during COVID, and his background is mechanical engineering. So like his development, I've never seen someone develop it the way he has. It's scary and phenomenal, and it's really cool. So with those guys, being able to just sort of learn from them and from us sitting together as a team, we've been able to sit in. I've been able to put input into the level 1, the structure, what's too much, what's too little, and so that's been really cool. So that's really been the journey with RTS Global so far. It's been like really from, I think it's been a 2.5-3 year total time frame so far, from that initial conversation to now.
After taking the course, in my mind, I've never seen such a detailed course when it comes to resistance training. And anyone who's interested in the resistance training should actually take the RTS course, because it opens up like your insight to a million things.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, like, now we're going to talk a lot about what we see in our daily lives, but like anyone wants to be a coach, anyone just goes out, do a 2 or 3 month certification, and they label themselves as a coach. What do you think is some of the controversies that we encounter daily, and what do you think is a way to get, let's say, the fitness industry up to a level where the standard coach is actually a good coach instead of...
I mean, I think the biggest challenge we face is that we're not a regulated industry, at least not well regulated anyway. That like if you look at like professions like law, medicine, even some of the trades as well, the engineering, etc., they have certain criteria that they need to meet from an ongoing professional development. They have almost the equivalent of CPDs, but they have the professional development that they have to keep up with a certain amount of learning. And if they don't, they can have their certifications or their like medical license, their don't know what you call the law version of that, but they would have these things removed. Like you have, it's not even up for discussion. You need to continue progressing and like expanding your knowledge or staying up to date with If it's law, you have to stay up to date with the current legislation in the area of law that you practice. If it's medicine, what are the new and upcoming innovations and techniques, and what's the most current literature? So like, it's just not even up for discussion like that. That's the minimum criteria, and then most of them will often do stuff beyond that to expand on their specialties and things like that. In fitness, it's like you get your level 3 and then many go, right, that's me.
Yeah, true.
I'll figure it out. And then I'll just watch some content on Instagram and I'll copy this and I'll go and try that. So I feel like there's a lot of that. It's just a lot of copy and paste. I think the RTS...
With no understanding.
With no understanding. So it's very much this sort of RTS, and I like the way that they explain it, is it's almost like this exercise choreography rather than, right, I'm going to set up a training program, I'm going to deliver certain exercises. Why am I doing that? What am I trying to achieve? And how am I going to do this for the person in front of me with the set of circumstances and considerations that they're presenting to me right now? And I think that's the biggest issue we face, is that the lack of regulation, because then it becomes a bit like the Wild West. People can just do what they want. I rarely see trainers on the gym floor with a structured training program. Most stuff is just off the cuff, random. It's like, what do you want to do today? They're asking the client, what do you want to do today? It's like, well, you should be leading. You're the one that should
Tell them what they need to do.
This is what they need to do based on the goals. But the problem is many of them don't have an onboarding process. They don't sit and collect data. They don't monitor data over time. This is where I think sort of traditional personal training needs to evolve as well. It's like, it needs to go beyond just people come in and do a training session.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the hybrids approach. So all of my in-person clients are also online clients.
Okay.
So they all have a coaching setup. They have their nutrition stuff going on in the background. They have their daily and weekly check-in stuff they have to do. But even if they're in person or online, they also have their structured training program. Just because I'm seeing them in person doesn't mean that, one, we don't need to have structure, because I'm not Rain Man. I've got an accounting and finance background. I'm good with numbers, but I'm not remembering every single set and rep, and also looking at the volume charts and seeing, are we progressing in the right direction? And so like, you need to have data. Ultimately, what gets measured gets managed. So most coaches are not even thinking about it from that perspective of, this is a profession, so I need to act like a professional. I need to have my systems, I need to have my data, and I need to be able to use that along with what I'm experiencing and discussing with the client to make adjustments to the plan. So I think until it gets to a point where more trainers start treating it like a profession, unfortunately the industry is going to continue being a massive gulf of, okay, you've got this standard over here where, for lack of a better term, many just turn up as expensive rent-a-friends. They're just there to count reps and, blow smoke up the client's arse and just make them feel warm and fuzzy inside and make sure they leave feeling a bit happier than when they came in, which, listen, I think if that's all the client's coming to you for, I think, okay, fine, but because this is the argument I've had with some people, but what if the client just wants that? They just want to turn up and they just want someone to supervise them for an hour. It's okay, that's fine, but you're also assuming that there's going to be no risk involved with that approach,
true, exactly.
Which I think is the big issue, because I've seen so many clients get injured. The coach is scrolling their phone, looking away, they're checking out a girl halfway across the gym, whatever it is, but I just think that because of the risk involved with exercise, there's a certain minimum competency and a minimum attention to care and detail that you need to have.
And this is music to my ears, because these are topics I talk a lot about, and they are disregarded. Like I talk a lot about the coaches just sitting there counting their reps, not doing their job. Like, this is why the industry here is not progressing as it should progress. Like, you have people like yourself who are extremely professional and look for every single detail, because if you don't do that, at the end of the day, you're seeing the client 3-4 times a week for 4 to 5 hours. They have the rest of the day, and they have a lot of things that they need to fix to be able to get the results they want to get. It's not just people coming here and just to pass their time, because eventually that also will lead to injuries, like you said.
Let's be honest, let's just say you are training someone 3 times a week. That's 1.7%. Let's say it's an hour a session, 1.7% of the total week.
Yes.
Do you think that 1.7% is going to be the thing that drives a lot of the results if a client's coming to you for fat loss or body composition change? Probably not. Even if they're coming to you for sports performance stuff, there's a whole other set of stuff they have to deal with out there, sleep, food, etc. But let's just assume, given that I'm here talking about composition and physique stuff, that 1.7% can have a pretty significant influence, but you better be damn good at what you're doing. In order for that to have such a significant impact, you need to be ticking a lot of boxes and doing a lot of things very well. And to your point, most coaches aren't. They're hardly even in the room. Like, they're there physically in body, but their mind is elsewhere. And so that's a big issue. And so I think if things are going to improve, there needs to be something else that holds coaches accountable. If it's not going to be some form of governing body, then I do think the facilities, even if they're allowing freelance trainers in the gym, have a certain responsibility for the standard that they allow in their gym. But you'll notice that places like Ultimate Performance, places that have a certain culture, they have a standard. Okay, you could still poke holes and criticize certain things about the methodology, but one thing you could not criticize is their attentiveness to their clients, and that the clients get a full experience for that hour, because like they're being observed constantly from the senior team. Yeah. It's non-negotiable, and they have performance reviews, KPIs. I don't think necessarily freelance trainers need that from the gyms they're in, but there's lessons to be learned from that. Like every other profession has accountability on a professional level. So I think the facilities have a role to play with. If you're allowing freelance trainers in, what's your vetting process? How do you know that they're actually a good coach, professional coach? And what are you doing to make sure that they're staying on top of a minimum set of standards? Do you maybe have agreement that they sign when they come in, where you're like, right, here's the minimum professional standards we expect from our coaches coming in to train their clients out of our facility? Most facilities don't, because all they're looking at is, well, I can take a rental or a membership, and if they've got 10 clients, I can take memberships from them. So the bottom line is the thing that's focused on first, which I get from a business standpoint, but the only way that you're going to stop so much attrition, which happens, you see it, trainers are coming and going in the industry, clients are coming and going. There is no retention. Retention is, we know that the cost of attrition is so much higher than anything else. Yeah. Like if you can put all your time and effort and all your fancy reels and social media marketing, but if you don't retain your clients, your business is never going to last, or it's never at least going to grow beyond where it is. And I think gyms forget that, as well as that you can have freelance trainers come in, they can pay rents, they can pay memberships, and their clients all pay memberships. But if that trainer is losing clients hand over fist, that's not stability for you either.
You're losing customers.
So I think the gyms have a role to play with it. But of course, the clients also have a responsibility as well. Many clients don't know what to look for, and they don't know what to almost like sort of sense check when it comes to hiring a trainer. I think part of it's an attitude thing. Like sometimes like attracts like. You'll get people who are really careless, poor attitudes. They'll just hire a trainer for 200 dirhams an hour and then be like, well, they're here to count my reps. And just, it's almost like, well, if they're there, I need to turn up because I don't want to lose the 200 dirhams, which is such a weird thing, because it's like, well, what's more important to you, actually turning up and getting something from this, or losing the money? Yeah. But the thing that they're most worried about is, well, I'm paying for that, so it's going to force me to at least show up to the gym. Okay, well, fine, that's maybe a good start, but
it's not sustainable.
If you pay that 3-4 times a week, you do that over 6 months, but you're no further forward than you were when you started. Like, if you look at that from a business or investment standpoint, if you had a zero ROR, return on investment, ROI, that would be unacceptable in any other profession or any other context. Like, if you had a financial investment or whatever else, but people are quite happy just to literally turn up, go through the motions, and not have a tangible return for their investment. If anything, sometimes they're in a worse position than when they started. Maybe they have injuries, or they've even gained a little bit of body fat, or their training hasn't improved any. So I think ultimately time is your most valuable commodity, but the customer is almost happier to waste the time and the money than just invest a little bit more upfront in the beginning, but get a proper professional trainer who will get them to that result sooner. Yes, it will cost them more in that 6 months than it would have over maybe 2 years with the other trainer, but at least in that 6 months, you've actually got what you wanted from the experience. So I think the trainers have a responsibility, the facilities have a responsibility, whether they're freelance or whether you employ the coaches, and the consumer has a responsibility to do their due diligence as well, I think.
I think now that you said it this way, it's like any other business. Like before you open a certain business, you study well. Let's say you do your forecast, what you're expecting. You with the PEDs, like you studied it. You made sure that you know, let's say, the effects of it. You took an informed decision based on, let's say, the research you did. Same needs to apply to the...
In that case, it's how do I get the most benefit while mitigating the most risk?
Exactly. No, I definitely agree. Yeah. We spoke a bit about the program structure, and you told me you don't mind taking longer, but as long as you're doing it the right way. So how does a periodized program look for you? Like, just take me through a basic periodized program for someone who's coming to you and wants to get in a certain shape.
We talking about training, or we talking about just the whole...
The whole thing. Let's go through the whole thing.
So I think the reason why I asked that is because if you look at the training, when it comes to hypertrophy training, it's quite straightforward, for lack of a better term. I think where the details come in is more the mechanics and execution of each exercise within your program. That for me, in hypertrophy, is where a lot of gains have been left on the table. If you look at what a training program is, ultimately it's an infrastructure. It's an infrastructure to be able to apply a stimulus and be able to see if that stimulus is being progressed over time. That's really all a program is. It's like where you'd have a structure for anything else. You just want to be able to have some data that you can record and make sure this actually moving somewhere and giving you something tangible out of it as well. So the training can be very similar for like a long period of time. I think one misconception you'll often see between body composition in particular is that there's this idea of fat burning workouts and building workouts and whatever else. But the reality is what builds muscle keeps muscle. And so training, whether you're in an improvement phase, fat loss phase, or you're maintaining, the training is the same. Now, where there might be some give, like push and pull, is more down to things like recovery management, fatigue. If I look at how I go about structuring periodization, the periodization is more around the goal than it is around the specific training itself.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is that, and I've almost got the sort of 5 main phase types within my coaching. I refer to it as like a priming phase. Other coaches will have other names for it. That phase is just to get someone physiologically and psychologically ready to handle the rigors of going in either direction, whether that's going into a building phase, which is intensive in its own right, or going into a fat loss phase, which of course is also stressful in its own right as well, for various reasons, different reasons. Then you have your reversing phases, or your...
Sorry, how does that phase look like? So what is the main focus, the first phase? So what's the main focus?
Yeah, so the main focus of that phase is we'll check all of their health markers. So we'll look at what's your blood pressure looking like, and we'll get them doing that maybe 3-4 times a week just to get a baseline of, right, how is blood pressure responding across a week? If it's not in a good place, we need to address it, because if blood pressure is not in a good place, good luck trying to push training progression as well. And of course, if you've got overweight clients, like if you're working with the gym pop, having high blood pressure, especially if they're hypertensive, even pre-hypertensive, will give certain contraindications for some things you can and can't do as well.
Sure.
A lot of trainers don't check for that. It's like if you've got a client who's literally pre-hypertensive or stage 1 to hypertension. I had one client come in when I was working at the, I won't say the name of the gym, but the gym that was a boutique studio for body transformations. And the guy's blood pressure was like 160 over 120. Horrible, just horrible stuff. And I remember one of the guys was like, well, I'm going to take him through his assessment session. And so he put him on a leg press, and I had to go over after the first set and say, you need to take him do something else. And you could tell he was looking really confused. Why? If someone's got high blood pressure, the last thing you want to do is put them on a leg press and have them putting a ton of load in their legs into their chest, because it could literally, for lack of a better term, it could give them an episode, like aneurysm, heart attack, whatever. Like it can send their blood pressure so high that they'll pass out. So there's certain things that they're contraindicated for. But luckily for me, I don't tend to work with as many clients that are in that position. Most of them are in a maybe okay, pretty decent place already, and then they're just trying to, how do I optimize this further? But even then, you'd be amazed the amount of personal trainers I've worked with where their blood pressure is like pre or like stage 1, stage 2 hypertension when they wake up in the morning. It sort of levels off as they go through the day, but they wake up and their stress response is through the roof. And this is someone that on the outside looks like they're in pretty decent shape, but their internal environment is telling a completely different story. For many coaches, their fasting blood glucose is pre-diabetic. You were talking like 115, 120. Should ideally be below 100 at the very least, maybe even somewhere around 80, 90. So we check things like blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, blood pressure, make sure their health markers are in a good place. If they can get blood work done, ideal.
Yeah.
Not always the case for everyone, but if they can, or if they have regular blood work and they have recent, we'll look at that as well, see if there's anything we need to think of, like thyroid, lipid management. So the health side of things takes a massive sort of front of stage when it comes to that phase. If all that stuff checks out, what we're then trying to do is, right, where's your nutritional habits at? Do you have the competency to manage your nutrition in a way where if I make an adjustment, it can be actioned fairly promptly and reliably as well? Because if someone hasn't got very good food awareness, and it's not necessarily to do, because I think a lot of people might think, well, they don't track their food. It's not necessarily about that, because some people, they can eat quite intuitively and manage their weight no problem. So it's not necessarily about the tracking, but if they've got a focused body composition goal, it's kind of like asking someone to, manage the finances. If you don't have some form of numbers and budget and and tracker.
Yeah.
Like you would never manage your money like that. You ask anyone who manages their savings, keeps an eye on the tabs on their investments. Everything is, you've got numbers for everything, and you need that because that's your feedback. So it's the same with your nutrition. Like you would ideally want to, if they're not ready to start tracking, move them towards where they have the skills to do that. If they already have the skills to do that, do we need to tighten things up there? So it's getting their competency in terms of what's their understanding around tracking-based skills, what's their competency around sort of general nutrition knowledge, like do they understand just basics around like macronutrients, energy balance, and then is there any sort of like misconceptions or myths that they maybe believe in, like, oh, I need to avoid sugar at all costs because sugar is bad and evil for you, that type of thing. Secret, it's not, sugar is not the devil, believe it or not, but that's a whole conversation for another time. But just looking at what is their competency with nutrition. Then with the training, have they ever followed a structured training program? Yes or no? If they have, what does that look like? Do they stick to a structured training program for long enough? They keeping a log? Do they actually know how to fill in an actual? You'd be amazed how many people don't know how to follow a training program properly. They might have had a training program, but they've never logged tracked the weights. They just follow the sets and reps, and they've been lifting the same load for like 3 months. I'm not getting any results. I don't know why nothing's changing. It's like, well, you're just doing the same reps and the same effort, the same load, and so nothing's going to change if you don't change. So it probably gives you an idea that across the board, whether it's the health, the training, the nutrition, what's their sleep look like, how's their digession. So
we basically cover everything before even getting them to a training.
To start fat loss or building. So we need to make sure that all of the key pillars, it's what we refer to them as pillars, all the key pillars are at an acceptable standard. That then gives us an idea, right? You're at a stage of readiness where, and also behaviors wise, are they at a stage of readiness where they're ready to make the changes? Because someone then can be, I've done all that initial work. They can be in a good place mentally, physically. But if they're not ready to commit to what's required sacrifice wise to achieve their goal, then just going into that phase just for the sake of it is just, it's going to lead to one thing. Yeah. They're going to get to a certain point, and then they're going to hit friction, hit a wall. So that's the first phase. The priming phase is, like we always describe it as, it's to prime someone physiologically and psychologically to be ready to handle the other phases. So then the other phase is, you've got one or two directions you go in. The two main phases is either you're going to go into a building phase, which is, this is putting the body in the right physiological environment to build as much muscle as possible. Okay. Now, people often ask, well, hold on, can you not do that while you're dieting? Can you not do that in a deficit? And there are some conditions that exist. You can do that, but it's the minority, not the majority. Yeah. So let's just assume that we're not the minority here and we're the majority. You put yourself in a slight calorie surplus. It doesn't have to be aggressive. You don't have to be piling on body fat for the sake of it. The whole, you probably know this one, like the dirty and clean bulking thing and all that stuff, and you hear people talk about this. The reality is that the whole goal of a building phase is to put on as much muscle or build strength and muscle as possible whilst minimizing adipose accumulation, so minimizing body fat gain. If you can do that successfully, that's a good improvement phase. How long that needs to be depends on the person, what their goal is, what the starting point is. Managing recovery and sleep is a massive importance during that phase as well, because ultimately, if you don't have enough sleep, you could be eating the right calories.
You won't get the benefits.
You just won't get the adaptations you're looking for. Yeah. Same in the fat loss phase. The fat loss phase is then, right, okay, the training is still important and we're still expecting progress up to a point. But once you get far enough into the deficit, so it's both dependent on the severity of the deficit and the duration that the deficit's been in place, will start to impact training performance, recovery, sleep, and then of course all the other signaling like hunger, cravings, libido, like all the other biological circadian sort of feedback mechanisms. You start to see that biofeedback really come into play and it really starts speaking. So it's managing those things, because there is always going to be a trade-off. Yeah, like you are going to feel hungry, you are going to get tired, you are going to have low energy.
You're in deficit.
You are going to have issues with sleep at some point, but managing those things where they can be as best as they possibly can be is the sort of goal of that phase. So it's applying the most appropriate deficit for that person. Now, that doesn't mean just like tiptoeing and just sort of like, for some people, they may prefer a more aggressive approach to dieting, because for them, they tend to suffer with more diet fatigue. So like they diet for too long, they can't hack it. Yeah. For other people, this comes back to people like myself, the robotic people, it's like, okay, well, the most optimal approach for you to take it steady and make sure you hold on to muscle. If you can sustain it a bit longer, like 20 weeks, 24 weeks, do that.
You rely mainly on client feedback here?
Experience, client feedback. If they've dieted for something like a photo shoot or a contest prep in the past, or even just a transformation. Okay, how did that go? What are the things that went well? Because I'm a big believer that, sure, success leaves clues, but mistakes and things that could have went better provide you even more feedback as well. It's all data to be used. So we use all of that. So for some people, they might benefit from a shorter, more aggressive fat loss phase. Yes, there might be more certain costs that come with that, but there's also costs that come with prolonging a fat loss phase as well. So you have to sort of weigh that up. Is this someone that needs a shorter, more aggressive time frame, or is this someone that needs a moderate approach, or someone that needs nice and steady? Because some people have a very low tolerance to dieting, and then in that case, you might be looking at multiple phases. So you might be looking at a fat loss phase, and I've done this with a lot of clients who are like talking 40% plus body fat. You might go through like a 24 week phase, diet break, another phase, diet break. So you might have to go through multiple phases to actually get to that end goal. But I think often what happens is, especially if you've got people who've got a lot of body fat to lose, many coaches just want to do it in one shot. And if they've not got that structure and that roadmap in place and keeping an eye on all those feedback that you're getting, both in terms of the numbers and in terms of biofeedback, it can get to a point where the client starts deviating or going off track or not being able to adhere to the plan. And if we know the sort of hierarchy of nutrition pyramid that was popularized by Dr. Eric Helms, you've got all this stuff like energy balance, macros, etc., etc., etc. But right underneath the pyramid, adherence sits there, because none of the stuff in the pyramid matters if you can't stick to it.
Yeah.
So
sorry to interrupt. When you're talking about macros, there's a lot out there. What are, let's say, the macro percentages that you would go when it comes to nutrition? If someone wants to have a general idea, what do you think is, or how do you apply it with your clients?
Yeah, I mean, I tend not to use percentages. However, there are certain percentages that you do just sort of keep in mind, especially, let's just say we look at fat loss, because that's where I think they actually come in the most. When it comes to protein, I mean, we've seen from the research, like for the longest time, it was sort of proposed that it was like the 1 pound or the 2 grams per, the 1 gram per pound of body weight, or the 2 grams per kilo of body weight. Now, the research has evolved quite a bit, not even just in the last 10 years, but even more recently, it's even went on a bit further. We know that those numbers have been moved up a little bit to even higher amounts. Even if you look at the protein overfeeding studies from Dr. Jose Antonio, we know that high protein diets have a lot of benefits.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, the only caveat to that is that you'll get a lot of coaches that try to apply really high protein diets, but that assumes that your client's digestion is in a place where it can manage that. Yeah. So where I see the biggest mistake made with going straight to really high numbers. But if I had to give a range, most people will do pretty well, somewhere between 1.8 to 2.4 grams per kilo of body weight.
Okay.
In some populations, it can be higher than that. Okay. Now, if you've got very heavily muscled individuals, or individuals utilizing PEDs, those numbers definitely go up. For example, I know that when I was in prep, I was on 3 grams per kilo of body weight. So I was like eating 300 grams of nutritional protein a day. It's quite a lot, but I didn't find that a lot. Like for me, that just felt, I was eating 5 meals a day, 5-6 meals a day. To get 40, 50 grams in a serving feels good. But I've had other clients that maybe they're slightly lower body weight, quite new to resistance training. Their tolerance in terms of food volume isn't very high. You're going to start them down more towards the bottom end. So getting the protein intake right, along with the calorie, just general calories, is the sort of main priority initially. Calories and protein, we get that nailed down, perfect. I'm a little bit more flexible if they're of low, let's say they're at a low competency level, I'm a bit more flexible with the carbs and fats initially. The only caveat to that, and there's lots of caveats within caveats, but the only caveat to would be if someone comes to me with maybe they've got insulin resistance or PCOS, you may have to be a little bit more, you definitely will need to be a lot more conscious of sources, timing, etc. Meal timing comes a lot later though than the energy balance and the protein side of things though. So yeah, protein, as long as that's somewhere in that 1.8 to 2.4 range, you're pretty good. Fats comes next. Interestingly, most people would think carbs comes next, but fats comes next. Why? Because technically carbs is a non-essential nutrient, as they call it. They say non-essential, but that's very misleading, just because it's non-essential physiologically, because the reason why it's non-essential is that your body can produce glycogen, glucose from other sources. It can do gluconeogenesis, it can break down protein, but also worst case scenario, it can also break down muscle tissue if it needed to give you the energy. Very expensive processes you ideally want to avoid if you want to optimize your results. So where carbohydrates come in is it's very much dependent on needs. So with the fats, they generally say that you don't want to be having ideally less than 20 to 25%. And I would say that actually from a health standpoint, I found that 30% of total calories from fats tends to support cellular health and hormonal health well, but you certainly wouldn't want to be going much lower than towards the end of a dieting phase. If you can try and stay away from going under 20%, that's a pretty good idea. You'll notice that when people go lower than that, things start to fall off very, very quickly. If you had to put an absolute number on that for females in particular, I mean, I've had a couple of female clients go as low as 25 grams of fat. That's nothing, like for a female. You'd ideally want them having more than that, but you might run that for like a 2-3 week period and you're like, okay, well, we know this is short term. Fine, we can sort of justify and get away with it. But as soon as you start reversing them back up to maintenance, getting those fats back up is really important. Carbs then, generally speaking, would fill in the gap, the remainder of calories. Now, the only caveat I would say to that is it just depends on the person. I'm a big believer in matching activity with needs.
Oof, that's actually what I wanted to say now. Like you said, it depends on the individual. Now we're talking mainly, let's say, resistance training. But when you have a basketball athlete or a different type of athletes, no, carbs is quite needed because
super important.
Yeah, because they need that to produce energy. But when it comes to people who do mainly resistance training and their goal is more of a physical goal, it's definitely different.
Still very important, and that's the thing that often gets overlooked because for athletes, like we know that ultimately glycogen is your fuel. Like you need that for performance. There's no question about it, and most good strength coaches, even if they're not doing the nutrition for the athletes, they know this. They know that are you getting sufficient glycogen to replenish post activity and also to actually get the most performance out of your your sessions as well and out of your games. But it's very synergistic with protein when it comes to hypertrophy as well.
True.
So you do need enough carbohydrates, enough glycogen to support amino acid synthesis as well, but you also need it to support performance in the gym. Because here's the thing, once performance starts to drop off enough, your strength starts to drop. Because one of the rules we have when it comes to taking clients through dieting phases is that we do not want your strength to drop off, ideally at all, although some people can keep their strength up, others it will drop off a bit, but there's a certain amount that we're willing to let that go before we say that's too much. Right. So the big mistake that a lot of people make is that they'll diet too aggressively or they'll go too low carb too early. Their strength drops off significantly, and then as a result, they're not holding onto muscle tissue. So a way to get around that, because let's just say you're at maintenance, you've got a certain amount of carbohydrates that you're used to having to fuel your sessions. You're going through your dieting phase, you want to keep your performance up. We know that strength is a neurological phenomenon, typically speaking. But there will get to a point though where you don't have that fuel available, performance is going to drop. So if you're able to keep carbohydrates, at least, and I'm a big fan of sort of training, non-training day intakes when you're working with people going through, physique transformations, whether it's prep or a photo shoot. Because if we can at least get them training well, keeping their strength up, it's the strength holding on to that's going to hold on to the tissue. I would rather bring volume down the deeper they get into a diet. And it doesn't always, I think often the problem is that many people do it too early as well. People can tolerate a lot more than you think. Like, we're not super fragile. Like, we can handle a little bit of stress for a period of time. But I do find that in particular, the leaner someone's getting, if someone's doing like a photo shoot to a reasonably lean degree, like we're talking 3-4 weeks out from a competition, or maybe they're going to step on stage, you will find it towards the end for a lot of people, just let's say they're doing 3 working sets of an exercise, bringing that down to 2, and maybe leaving 1 or 2 reps in reserve towards the end. It's just enough to keep strength up, but also bring volume down, because if you've got 3 sets, you've got all the glycogen stores to be able to support that, replenish that. But you don't have, let's just say you go from having, I'll just pick a random number, like 250 grams of carbs, and then by the end of your fat loss phase, you're like 50, 75. Your pool of glycogen stores are so limited, you don't have the resources there to support that volume. So therefore, by pulling volume down but keeping the strength parameters up, that helps you to hold on to muscle tissue. So that's probably one of the few, if you were to talk about what are the fat loss changes you would make, probably just the adjustment to volume. But it's when intensity drops too much, that's where you'll see physiques often not look as good as they could towards the end.
Okay.
That's 3 of the phases. The other 2 phases, which we don't need to get into too much. One is, I like to call it back to baseline. It's what most people would call reverse dieting. But the reason why I don't call it reverse dieting is because it works in both directions. Someone's coming from a building phase back to maintenance, or from dieting back to maintenance, I sort of refer to that as back to baseline. So the whole goal is not what the traditional just 100 calories at a time, like you probably heard this as well, reverse dieting. It used to be this like super slow taper up. The thing that people often forget is that the clue's in the name, it's reverse dieting. If you've said, right, I'm going to diet someone for 16 weeks, and then you do a reverse diet and say it takes 4, 5, 6 weeks to get them back to maintenance, you've extended the diet by 6 weeks. They're still dieting. That might not be appropriate for that individual, and especially if they've been doing something like contest prep, it's definitely not appropriate. But there's a lot of coaches that they almost they hang this sort of reverse dieting up as this like magical method that keeps you lean while getting you back up to maintenance. And it's like, well, first of all, you don't want to stay as lean as you were when you're at the end of a fat loss phase.
You need to go back to
you need to gain it. You might not want to go back to where you were originally, especially if you're a Gen Pop client and you were carrying more body fat than you needed, but you certainly will need to gain a little bit to get back to a good maintenance.
Yeah, like your baseline will be better than your initial
previous baseline. Exactly that. And that's the thing. That's, for me, we refer to that as like the end game.
Right.
The end game is to be in a maintenance by the time I finish working with a client is so superior to the maintenance they started with. If I can leave them in that place with all the habits, all the behaviors, all the skills they need to do everything on their own at that point, then that's a job well done. And so that's the fifth phase, is maintenance. Is how, because many people, and you get this with a lot of coaches and contest prep athletes, they know how to diet. They know how to go towards the extremes. They are unbelievably uncomfortable in the middle. This idea of just sitting at maintenance drives them crazy. And not only that, they don't have the skills to actually do that. I tell them, right, we're now going to start doing what we call phasic removal. We're going to start pulling away tracking so that you can just eat intuitively. You know, like sort of what meals look like. You can eyeball a plate. You can eat out and not be like have a aneurysm or a heart attack, thinking that, oh, what if the calories are too much, or what? The whole point is you need to be able to enjoy social occasions. Food is so much more than just a number, so much more than just macros and calories. It's, if you look at the blue zones, you look at civilization, like gathering around food, and the idea of breaking bread was such an important part of socializing and culture. So if you don't know how to go out and interact and be social without panicking, it's not a very good position to leave someone in. So sometimes you have to educate people on, here's how to actually maintain without tracking your foods, without feeling like you have to attach numbers to everything, feeling okay with making decisions, not knowing the numbers, but still being able to stay within a maintenance that you're happy with. So that is, I would say maintenance is probably the most underappreciated phase of all body composition coaching.
What I'm loving about what you're saying is you educate your clients along the way, because this is what separates good coaches from regular coaches. You educate your client. Once your client can take proper informed decisions with what they're eating because of how well you educated them, basically you would have achieved, let's say, your goal as a coach, of course, throughout the different phases. But at the end of the day, you're not always going to be here. So they need to also take accountability and know which decisions to take, especially regarding nutrition.
I want my clients to finish working with me in a position where they can leave because they have all the tools that they need to do it alone, but they choose to stay because they enjoy the relationship and the service they're getting. That is, I think, the best compliment you can ever get, is that a client's like, I think I can do this alone now. Of course, if they want to stay for other reasons, that's great. But whenever I get a client after like 1 year, 2 years, and they're like, this was so valuable and I will keep all of this with me for as long as I continue to train, it doesn't get any better than that.
Man, I love it, because I always have a say, a great coach doesn't need to coach. You reach a point where you don't need to coach your clients. They come here, like you said, for the relationship. Of course, you're always going to have different tools. At the end of the day, we keep on educating ourselves to become better and to train our clients in a more advanced way. But once we don't need to coach them a lot, this is where we know like we actually did a great job.
And it keeps things fun for us as well, because if your clients know, and I think this is also something, because you just hit the nail on the head, clients stay because they're like, I'm still learning from you. I'm still getting new things, and you're learning new things, and I'm benefiting from you investing in your knowledge and learning new things. But if a lot of coaches are getting to the point where they're like, well, I don't really feel like I need to do any education, even if you've done a pretty good job, in terms of, if we all look at it from a business head as well, if you want to retain clients, but you're not offering anything new or a different perspective, clients have no reason to stay. Whereas if you're constantly updating yourself, they see that you're always continuously excited and passionate about the new things you're exploring, they're more likely to stick around, because they're like, well, because you're leading by example. Like, if he's continuing to level up and learn new things, then I want to do that too. So it's a no-brainer.
Definitely. Given that you went through this whole career path, going through everything you went through, would you have done things differently?
That's a great question. Probably the one thing I would have done, but again, there wasn't much available when I first got into the industry, especially when I was back in Scotland. I wish I'd got a coach or a mentor sooner.
Okay.
That's probably the number one thing, because since I've been working with Cal, and it's been literally 7 years, he's the only, well, I'm not going to say he's the only coach, he's the third coach that I hired, but he's the one that I've been with by far the longest. That has done more for my personal and professional development than any course that I've attended. RTS, I'd say it had a different influence. There's something very different that you get from coaching and mentoring that you get from education.
Of course.
RTS was, for lack of a better term, I hate to use this word because it makes it sound like it's like a cult, but it's an ideology. It's a way, but it's an ideology in the best possible way. It's this idea of teaching you how to think, not what to think.
Okay.
So actually one of our taglines that we have on our t-shirts now, because it's true. Like, so that had a major influence in that way. But from a applied in practice standpoint, the stuff that I've done with Cal, like we've been able to sit with client case studies, rip it apart, dissect the problems. And so being able to do that and have that other person to sort of bounce off of, who has taken 1,000 more steps than you have, who has had just that bit more, or in his case, quite a bit more results, exposures to different populations. Like when you've got someone there that you can, regardless of what the situation is, go and ask a question. And in the very, very rare case that he doesn't have the answer, he'll find out. Yeah. Or he'll pay for a consult from someone to find out answers to things he doesn't know. And I've done the same. I've paid for consults with people that they're not my coach, or I've not invested in their education, but I've just paid for an hour of their time because I just want to understand a specific problem. So I think if there's one thing I would have done earlier in my career, again, like I say, I do think that there wasn't as many options back then, but maybe I just wasn't aware of them. Obviously, nowadays you have so many access to all these educators out there. You can find people on social media so easy. There was no such thing as Instagram back then. And some of the educators that you sort of knew of back then, like back in my day, it was like, I say this like I'm a really old man. It starts to sound like that now. It's like back in my day, it was Eric Cressy.
Okay.
It was one of the first people I learned off of. You probably know who Eric Cressy is. No? So he's a very famous strength conditioning coach, Canada and US. He has Cressy Sports Performance. So coaches mostly baseballers, but they have other athletes as well. He was one of the first guys that was really prolific with writing blogs. Okay. So I'd read every single one of his blogs. He was very much the master of like everything related to shoulder health. I learned a ton from that. So this is the ways you learned. You sort of read blogs, articles. You learn from these sort of people. But in terms of direct access to coaches and mentors, like it just wasn't a prominent thing back then. So if it was available, that would have been something that I would have done differently. Is get a coach and or mentor behind me, like as early as I possibly could have, I would have done it.
So after saying that, what is an advice you would give for young coaches who are starting their career?
God, there's so much. Starts with the mindset, probably just go in with the mindset that every person that you meet has something to teach you. Now, it might sometimes be what not to do, but every interaction you have, whether it's a member of the gym, one of your clients, another trainer, whoever it is, like, everyone has something to teach you. I think nowadays far too many trainers come in already with a preconceived sort of notion of, right, this is how I want to be, this is what I want to do, and these are the people I listen to, and I don't listen to anyone else. And I think these echo chambers are not helpful, because it just narrows down your ability to solve problems. So I think being open-minded is the first thing. I do think like getting a coach and mentor behind you as soon as possible, I would always recommend that. Of course, I understand that financially that's not feasible for trainers. It might be that like they can't afford to pay for someone monthly to...
But you have access to a lot of things and people to follow. Like you can follow the right people and actually learn from them. It's different than when you have the live talks with them, but still.
I would say that, and again, this is sort of almost giving financial advice. I would say early on, start putting have 2 pots by that you put by every month. Make sure, of course, you can bloody cover your bills and have roof over your head and food on the table. But once you've got that sorted, have 2 pots. One that goes by for starting to put into a long-term investment. That's something that I wish I'd done immediately when I came over here. And it took my wife and I 5 years before we started doing that, putting into a long-term investment. Because one thing as well, especially if you're based here, might be different if you're in the UK. Well, it is different because you have national insurance and you have a pension. As soon as you move away from your home country, I don't get access to a pension now. So I have to have my own pension. So you have to start thinking about that. So putting a little bit of pot by, even if it's only $100 a month, doesn't sound like 300 dirhams. Doesn't sound like a lot, but start putting something by for putting into a long-term investment. Literally an index fund that you put into, you don't have to think about. It grows year upon year over the long term. We know that index funds outperform 95% of financial advisors over a 30-year period, right? So that would be the first thing. Second thing would be then have a second pot that you start putting by for education. You might not be able to go and do a course or hire a mentor or whatever for the first year, but start putting money by so that you can.
No.
So that would be probably the first piece of advice. If there's someone in your gym that you look up to that seems like they're pretty sensible, try and see if you can, even if they just a training partner, just like spend time around people that seem like they've got good advice to offer, they're sensible people, because that alone, just having that bit of a support network at the start is everything.
You would level up like crazy.
Crazy, especially if they're an experienced coach who's been in the industry longer than you have. Even if it's just, hey, can I join you for a couple of workouts a week? It's a start. It will give you some insight. You'll ask questions. Most people when they're training together will openly share. I know for me, whenever I spend time with people, like I will just, any questions they have, I just pour. So I think that's a big thing, is get yourself a little bit of a support network initially, because I think the way the fitness industry is going now, especially new coaches coming in, and this is going to be my third piece of advice, is don't be so quick to jump online.
Yeah.
So many coaches now come in and they see almost like, and I was speaking to my business mentor, Mike Harrison, about this when he was on the podcast, and I asked him the question directly. I was like, where do you think this comes from, this sort of superiority complex that online coaching is like above in-person training? Because that's often the perception, is like that, okay, well, if you're an in-person coach, well, that's okay, you'll eventually make it to here. It's like, no, this is not like this is here and this is different. Here. It's just this is a vehicle to offer a service and this is a vehicle to offer a service. And if you do both, I personally think for most personal trainers, that's the ideal place to be, because you'll only be able to address training specific things in the training session. I don't care if someone says, no, but we talk between sets. Well, if you're doing that, you're probably not having an effective session, at least not if you're really getting into nutrition and challenging the limiting beliefs. And if like, you're challenging a client on the mindset stuff, you're sat down for probably 5 minutes minimum. What's happening to a training session when you're doing that? So you need time where, and I say this to my clients when we start working together, training time is training time. Everything else we deal with in the coaching process, check-ins, WhatsApp, etc. I'm not going to say don't ask small questions. I'm not going to be an asshole, but at the same time, it's like, well, if we can clearly separate these two things, we make sure the training is effective and we deal with all the other stuff. So don't feel like you have to progress to online coaching. Only offer it once it becomes a necessary add-on to your service to offer. And the reality is you probably won't have the knowledge at that point to be able to provide nutrition coaching, to be able to coach people online. Get that hands-on experience, get good at building relationships with people, solving problems in person. I think that most coaches, if they just spent at least 2 years being in person and getting a full roster first, showing that they can do that and be of service, then when you add an online coaching component to that, naturally you're going to have way more skills to be able to help people.
Like you said, it's an add-on. It's not something that like, to me, you get the most value when you go for the live sessions. Everything else is built based on that. The way you build your brand, the way you build everything, I believe, is through this. Once you have, this is good, your brand is good, eventually you can scale it up in a certain way using, let's say, the online.
I mean, it's funny. I used to say that the online was an add-on. We're quite careful not to word it like that now, because I actually think the coaching is the main event, because the coaching deals with the higher percentage of all of the stuff they need to deal with. But training is not like just it might be 1.7% in terms of time, but in terms of the magnitude of influence, it has an incredible impact.
Agreed.
And I agree, like the relationships you can build in person versus online is not comparable. So I think if you are going to add online, just do your due diligence, like become a good face-to-face coach first. Then the online coaching may still not be for you. Like I know a couple of guys who do just in person and they love it and make a good living. They're fulfilled. I think just this pressure to go online, I would just be very careful of that. If you're a new coach coming into the industry, be okay coming in, maybe working for working for a company, working for a gym, maybe not making a ton of money than if you were to go freelance, but you know what? You're going to have to build experience, competence, and exposure to people anyway. Once you've done your time, paid your dues for the first 1 or 2 years,
exactly,
then go freelance, then think about adding an online.
Don't just jump steps. Enjoy the process. Take it one step at a time.
Exactly. I think there's always exceptions to the rule, sure. And but the problem is people always point to the exceptions and say, but they're doing this. It's like, yeah, but they're not you.
Yeah.
Don't look at the exceptions as the norm, because that's dangerous. And we have a habit in this industry of doing that, looking out to the exceptions and thinking that's the way to do things. Exceptions are exceptional for a reason. So
Agreed.
Exactly that. Those would be my 3 pieces of advice. Put money by for your long-term education and just personal finances. Try and get someone get a mentor, get under the wing of someone who is more experienced than you, and get in-person experience before you go online.
I would add one small thing. Just be humble. Be humble to everything you're doing. Yeah. It's not wrong to have a mentor. It's not wrong to ask questions. Just be humble throughout the whole process.
Yeah, I think that's a big reason why a lot of people don't do it, is they almost feel like it, and I've heard this, my clients won't take me seriously. Like, what, you're a trainer, why do you need a trainer? And that's where the saying goes. I don't care how cliche it sounds. Coaches need coaches too.
I agree. Ross, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for your time. Honestly, I do believe we can have another podcast episode. It was lovely to have you. Looking forward for another meet.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My guy.